Organizing your life is not a dramatic act. It does not require an audience. It is not something you announce with noise or spectacle. It is an inner movement, subtle and often invisible. A quiet alignment between what you know consciously and what moves within you unconsciously. While many people invest their energy in constructing an image of strength, success, or happiness, the real work happens in silence. It happens in self-examination. It happens in the courage to bring order to your own existence, even when no one applauds, notices, or understands. A disorganized life is rarely just about messy schedules or unfinished tasks. It reflects a chaotic inner landscape, a restless and fragmented mind. An organized life, especially one built in silence, reveals structure, clarity, and steadiness. It reveals a psyche that is no longer divided against itself. You do not need to announce your changes. You do not need to explain your quiet phases. In fact, the need to convince others that you are transforming often distracts you from truly transforming. The focus is not on how you appear, but on how you live. Not on how you are perceived, but on whether your life is coherent, authentic, and effective, free from excess, free from waste, free from internal distractions that keep you scattered. When you stop obsessing over the image you project and begin caring for the invisible foundation that supports your daily life, everything begins to shift. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop feeding your internal chaos. You begin to act with method instead of impulse. You observe more calmly. You prioritize what truly matters. And above all, you learn to say no to what keeps your mind and heart in disorder. Whether that disorder is mental, emotional, financial, or spiritual, organizing your life is not a natural talent reserved for a disciplined few. It is a conscious choice, and like every choice that truly transforms, it demands strength, consistency, and discernment. To live in an ordered way is to reject haste and reactivity. It is to accept that real control does not lie in external events, but in how you structure your inner world to face whatever comes. That structure is built on deep principles, not temporary moods. If you are ready to make this silent commitment to your inner evolution, then you understand that the work begins within. It always does. Organizing your life is an act of individuation. It goes far beyond maintaining productivity or keeping a perfect calendar. From the perspective of Carl Jung's psychology, it represents one of the most meaningful movements of human existence, the path toward becoming who you truly are. Individuation is not about looking like someone who has everything under control. It is about actually becoming whole. It is about integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche into a coherent unity. This integration demands honesty. It demands that you recognize the parts of yourself you have neglected, denied, or feared. Your contradictions, your insecurities, your unresolved wounds, your untapped potential. Organizing your life in this context is not about presenting perfection to the world. It is about making a radical commitment to inner truth. It is about looking directly at the chaotic elements of your mind, automatic patterns, limiting beliefs, emotional complexes, repressed memories. It is about bringing them into awareness rather than letting them silently dictate your behavior. When Jung spoke of becoming who you are, he was not referring to a performance. He was speaking about the courage to walk your own path authentically, even if that disappoints others. External disorder often mirrors internal conflict. When there is division within you, your routine feels heavy. Your decisions feel confused. Your relationships become strained. Organizing your life does not begin with a productivity app. It begins with listening to the soul, quieting external noise long enough to hear your intuition, recognizing what is out of balance, and slowly beginning the work of reintegration. This process is silent by nature. It is invisible to the casual observer. While many are concerned with appearing happy or successful, the person on the path of individuation is busy establishing order within. That order is not rigidity, it is structure. It is not obsessive control. It is clarity of purpose. It is a life guided by meaning rather than image. True power does not come from dominating others. It comes from mastering yourself, from integrating consciously every part of your history and personality. Organizing your life is therefore both psychological and spiritual. It is the decision to stop reacting impulsively to the world and start responding from a stable inner center. It is choosing presence over distraction, intention over chaos, responsibility over blame. It is releasing the constant search for approval and instead seeking coherence between what you feel, what you think, and how you act. But this path requires confronting your shadow. You cannot build a stable structure on denial. The shadow contains the parts of yourself you have rejected or suppressed. It contains your anger, your envy, your fears, your insecurities, and sometimes even your brilliance. If you ignore it, it will sabotage your efforts to create order. It will surface in subtle ways. Procrastination, self-doubt, conflict, self-sabotage. Organizing your life requires that you acknowledge this shadow, not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. When you bring your shadow into awareness, you reclaim energy. Energy that was once tied up in repression becomes available for growth. You stop fighting yourself internally. You stop living in contradiction. You begin to act from integration rather than fragmentation. That is when discipline stops feeling forced. That is when clarity becomes natural. That is when your external world starts reflecting your internal order. Living an organized life also requires setting boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are structures that protect your energy. They allow you to prioritize what aligns with your purpose and decline what does not. Without boundaries, your life becomes reactive. With boundaries, it becomes intentional. You no longer say yes out of guilt or fear. You say yes because it aligns with your values, and you say no because you respect your time and your energy. This form of organization is not cold or mechanical. It is deeply human. It allows you to experience emotions fully without being ruled by them. It allows you to work with focus without becoming obsessed. It allows you to connect with others without losing yourself. It creates stability without suffocating spontaneity. Over time, something remarkable happens. You begin to trust yourself. Your decisions become clearer because they arise from integration rather than confusion. Your daily habits align with your long-term vision. Your relationships improve because you are no longer projecting unresolved inner conflict onto others. You stop chasing chaos because you no longer need it to distract you from yourself. An organized life is not perfect. It is aligned. It is not free of challenges. It is structured enough to face them. It is not about eliminating uncertainty. It is about building inner stability so that uncertainty does not destabilize you. It is about cultivating a mind that is calm enough to think clearly and a heart that is grounded enough to act wisely. This is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. Each day you choose order over impulse, clarity over confusion, responsibility over avoidance. Each day you reinforce the structure of your inner world, and gradually, without spectacle, without applause, your life transforms. You will notice it in small ways. Your mornings feel less chaotic. Your thoughts feel less scattered. Your priorities feel clearer. Your relationships feel more authentic. The noise that once dominated your mind begins to fade. In its place emerges a quiet strength. This strength does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply exists. It is the strength of someone who has faced themselves and chosen integration over denial, someone who has stopped performing and started becoming. Organizing your life is not about controlling every outcome. It is about creating a foundation strong enough to endure outcomes you cannot control. It is about aligning your daily actions with your deepest values. It is about building a life that makes sense from the inside out. And when you reach that point, you realize something profound. You no longer crave external validation the way you once did. You no longer measure your worth by comparison. You measure it by coherence, by whether your life reflects who you truly are. That is the quiet power of inner organization. It is not flashy, it is not loud, but it is transformative. It is the decision to bring order to your soul. And once you begin, you will understand that this is not just about organizing your schedule. It is about organizing your existence. Organizing your life is not merely about what you think or what you feel. It is about the alignment between what you think and what you do. It is about coherence. And that coherence is what makes life not only organized, but whole. A life becomes meaningful when there is continuity between your inner convictions and your outer actions, when your values are not abstract ideas, but lived realities, when your decisions reflect your deepest truths. That is when order stops being superficial structure and becomes integrity. From the perspective of Carl Jung's depth psychology, the outer world often mirrors the inner landscape of the psyche. External chaos, daily confusion, turbulent relationships, cycles of self-sabotage, chronic procrastination is rarely just circumstantial. More often, it is the visible expression of internal psychic disorder that has been ignored, repressed, or misunderstood. Jung stated with clarity, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What we refuse to confront within ourselves tends to reappear in our external reality, not as coincidence, but as projection. The shadow, in Jungian thought, represents the unconscious aspects of the personality that have been rejected, denied, or excluded from awareness. When we suppress essential parts of who we are in order to fit in, please others, or emotionally survive, we create a fracture within ourselves. That inner split generates psychic noise. Over time, this fragmentation becomes unsustainable. A divided mind lacks clear direction. It begins to influence choices indirectly through impulsivity, anxiety, unconscious repetition. Life feels chaotic and out of control, but in truth, it reflects a soul that has lost contact with its totality. Attempting to organize life purely on an external level, cleaning your space, scheduling tasks, setting goals, will always be incomplete if internal chaos remains unexamined. True organization begins when you give voice to what has been silenced inside you. Old wounds, unspoken truths, repressed desires, fears you pretend not to feel. When these elements are acknowledged rather than denied, integration begins, and from integration comes authentic order. In this sense, chaos is not an enemy. It is a messenger. It signals misalignment. It invites introspection. It calls you to examine what has been neglected in your inner world. When you approach your shadow with honesty and courage, you initiate a process of reintegration. And as this internal reconciliation unfolds, external life begins to reflect that harmony. Circumstances shift not because the world changed, but because you did. Order ceases to be an illusion of control and becomes the natural expression of inner balance. Beginning your day with presence is not simply a wellness practice. It is an act of reconnecting with what Jung called the self, the organizing center of the psyche, the totality that transcends the ego. The ego concerns itself with daily responsibilities, social roles, and external demands. The self represents your deeper essence, your internal compass, the source of wisdom that guides individuation. When you wake up and immediately surrender to notifications, obligations, and mental noise, you reinforce fragmentation. You begin your day in reaction mode, but when you choose silence, even briefly, you recenter. 10 conscious minutes in the morning can prevent external chaos from dictating your inner rhythm. Presence upon waking becomes a symbolic ritual of alignment. It is the individual withdrawing momentarily from external pressures to listen to the quiet voice within. The self does not shout, it whispers. It requires stillness to be heard. Conscious presence functions as a bridge between the unconscious and the ego. It allows insight to surface before the demands of the day scatter your focus. This simple act transforms your orientation. Instead of living reactively, you live directionally. Instead of being pulled outward, you are guided from within. Jung believed transformation occurs when we respond to internal calling rather than external pressure. Beginning the day with awareness is a declaration, silent but powerful, that your life will be guided from the inside out. That clarity, not chaos, will define your actions. Reducing distractions is not about ascetic discipline, it is about protecting your connection to the unconscious. We live in an age of overstimulation, constant notifications, endless information, perpetual connectivity. But there is a hidden cost. When your attention is continuously fragmented, your inner dialogue becomes inaccessible. The unconscious communicates through symbols, dreams, intuitions. It requires space. If your mind is saturated with external noise, those subtle signals are drowned out. Distraction becomes a defense mechanism. It allows you to avoid discomfort. It shields you from confronting unresolved emotions. But what you avoid grows stronger in silence. True psychological order demands intentional boundaries around your attention, not to isolate yourself from the world, but to preserve internal depth. When you reduce distraction, you create psychological space. In that space, reflection becomes possible. Patterns become visible. Emotional responses become understandable rather than automatic. You shift from unconscious reaction to conscious response. This is not about productivity. It is about awareness. Living in order means embracing responsibility for your psychic energy. It means recognizing that attention is a finite resource. Where you direct it shapes your reality. If you feed distraction, fragmentation increases. If you cultivate presence, coherence grows. Ultimately, organizing your life is not about perfection. It is about alignment. It is about closing the gap between intention and action. It is about facing your shadow rather than projecting it. It is about listening to the self rather than chasing external approval. It is about protecting your mental space from unnecessary noise. It is about beginning each day in conscious connection rather than reactive urgency. When thought and action become unified, when inner truth and outer behavior reflect each other, life gains depth. Order ceases to be a rigid system and becomes an organic expression of psychological integration. And that is what makes a life not merely organized, but profoundly whole. Overstimulation has become the default state of modern life. Constant demands, relentless notifications, endless streams of information. Beneath this surface, something subtle happens, a gradual disconnection from ourselves. Carl Jung warned that contact with the unconscious, and by extension with the soul, is only possible when the mind is receptive, when external noise fades and space is created for inner listening. Every distraction we accept without awareness, every time we jump from one task to another impulsively, we step further away from our own essence. The self, the totality of being, does not reveal itself in chaos. It inhabits silence. It emerges when the ego softens its anxiety for control, performance, and validation. Reducing distractions is not a rejection of progress or the world. It is an act of psychological respect. when you silence unnecessary notifications, limit irrelevant consumption, and step away from environments that constantly pull you outward, you are not isolating yourself. You are creating a channel through which the unconscious can speak. Intuition, one of Jung's essential psychological functions, does not thrive in overstimulation. It is like a rare flower that grows in protected soil, away from urgency and noise. In quiet moments, when the mind stops chasing stimuli and begins observing, ideas surface naturally. Symbols gain clarity. Repressed emotions rise gently into awareness, ready to be integrated. Jung viewed silence as sacred territory for the psyche. In silence, forgotten dreams reappear. Insights arrive effortlessly. Inner imagery becomes accessible to consciousness. Modern life pushes us toward constant distraction. The further we drift from our inner world, the more vulnerable we become to unconscious repetition, self-destructive habits, and meaningless decisions. Reducing distraction is not a productivity hack. It is a symbolic and spiritual act of reclaiming your center. Protecting your attention is protecting your soul. Creating pauses is not indulgence. It is a psychological necessity for those who seek genuine self-knowledge. Transformation begins in inner listening. From the perspective of Jungian psychology, what we call excess is often shadow disguised as necessity. The superfluous is rarely neutral. It frequently represents unconscious attempts to avoid confronting internal emptiness. When we accumulate possessions, commitments, distractions, or relationships without purpose, we often do so to avoid facing unresolved internal conflicts. On the surface, excess appears comforting. Beneath it, it can be escape. Jung reminded us that what remains unintegrated operates in the shadows. The unconscious governs life when left unexamined. Mindless consumption, overbooked schedules, compulsive busyness. These are rarely random behaviors. They are symptoms of a psyche attempting to fill internally what has not yet been reconciled. The pursuit of more recognition, more stimulation, more validation, is often an attempt to anesthetize discomfort with incompleteness. Psychological evolution does not arise from accumulation, but from conscious reduction. Questioning what is unnecessary in your life requires courage. It demands that you stop searching externally for solutions to internal dilemmas. Every unnecessary layer, material or psychological, creates distance between the ego and the self. These layers obstruct transformation. Refining the psyche is a process of purification. Just as an alchemist separates gold from dross, you must distinguish what is essential from what is shadow, disguised as desire. Every object without meaning, every obligation accepted out of fear, every unconscious repetition carries trapped psychic energy. Releasing the superfluous frees that energy. It opens space for authenticity to emerge. Living with less is not deprivation. It is integration. It is looking around your life and recognizing only what resonates with your deepest truth. That clarity cannot be purchased or imitated. It can only be lived. Healthy boundaries are the visible expression of a strengthened ego. In Jung's psychology, the ego is not the enemy. It is the center of consciousness, responsible for organizing experience and navigating reality. But for the ego to function properly, it must be mature, grounded, and aligned with authenticity. One of the clearest signs of a well-formed ego is the ability to establish boundaries without aggression or guilt. Saying no with clarity is not selfishness, it is psychological differentiation. It signals that you recognize where you end and where others begin. Without boundaries, the ego becomes porous. It absorbs projections, expectations, and emotional burdens that do not belong to it. Over time, this erosion creates resentment, confusion, and loss of identity. A fragile ego seeks approval at any cost. A strengthened ego understands its limits. Boundaries are not walls of isolation. They are lines of integrity. They define what is acceptable, what is sustainable, and what aligns with your values. When you establish limits consciously, you protect your psychic energy. You prevent unconscious resentment from accumulating. You stop participating in dynamics that distort your authenticity. Jung emphasized individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Individuation requires differentiation. It requires the courage to separate your identity from collective expectations and inherited patterns. Boundaries support this differentiation. They prevent fusion with roles that suppress your individuality. They allow you to engage the world without dissolving into it. A strengthened ego does not dominate others. It governs itself. It recognizes its vulnerabilities without collapsing. It stands firm without hostility. When you set boundaries calmly and consistently, you communicate self-respect. And self-respect reorganizes your life more effectively than external control ever could. Living in alignment is an ongoing discipline. It is not about dramatic gestures or visible transformations. It is about subtle daily choices. Reducing distraction protects your connection with the unconscious. Releasing excess purifies your psychic space. Establishing boundaries fortifies your ego. Together, these practices cultivate integration. Integration is not perfection. It is wholeness. It is the ability to hold contradictions without fragmentation. It is the capacity to move through the world with internal coherence. An organized life is not rigid. It is fluid but structured. It reflects an inner order that is flexible yet grounded. When you protect your attention, refine your environment, and honor your boundaries, you are not performing change. You are embodying it. The external world gradually mirrors the inner. Clarity you cultivate. Relationships become healthier. Decisions become simpler. Anxiety decreases, not because challenges disappear, but because your internal structure can withstand them. True organization is psychological alignment. It is the quiet integration of conscious intention and unconscious depth. It is the steady commitment to living from your center rather than reacting from fragmentation. It is choosing coherence over chaos, substance over appearance, authenticity over excess. And, in that quiet alignment, life becomes not merely structured, but deeply powerfully whole. Serenity is not withdrawal, it is not coldness, it is not a defensive wall built to keep the world out. Serenity is a profound affirmation of self-worth. It is the quiet decision to protect one's psychic space so that the process of individuation can unfold without being invaded by collective pressures or external demands. Many people still confuse boundaries with selfishness, but in truth, the absence of boundaries reveals a weakened ego, an ego that seeks validation at any cost and fears disapproval more than it fears self-abandonment. A porous ego becomes fragmented. It is constantly penetrated by opinions, expectations, and emotional burdens that do not belong to it. The psyche destabilizes when the mouth says yes, but the heart says no. This internal split drains vitality. It breeds resentment, frustration, and the subtle sense of imprisonment that so many mistake for responsibility. Jung reminds us that becoming who we are requires differentiation, not isolation, but clear delimitation. Without inner boundaries, there is no safe space for the self to emerge. When you learn to say no with clarity, you draw an invisible line between external expectation and internal truth. This line does not need to be defended with anger or over-explanation. It communicates itself through coherence, firmness, and posture. True authority does not shout. It radiates from inner conviction. A strengthened ego understands what is negotiable and what is not. This wisdom does not arise from pride, but from intimacy with one's own inner world. To establish boundaries is not merely to protect time or energy. It is to protect the sacred process of integration between ego and self. It is to affirm, my presence has value, and I can only offer it authentically when I am not betraying myself. This is the fertile ground where self-knowledge grows. True peace, however, is not born from control or perfection. In Jungian psychology, genuine inner peace arises from reconciliation with the shadow. Serenity is not the absence of conflict, it is the integration of opposites within the psyche. Every individual carries a shadow, the hidden, repressed, or denied aspects of personality. These are traits we consider unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous. And as long as they remain unconscious, they influence our actions indirectly and often destructively. Many strive to appear balanced, strong, loving, spiritually elevated, but when this image is not supported by authentic inner work, it becomes a mask, what Jung called the persona. The persona is necessary for social life, but dangerous when it replaces the authentic self. A peace maintained solely by appearance is fragile. It collapses under pressure. The denial of the shadow exacts a price. Disguised anxiety, sudden emotional outbursts, psychosomatic symptoms, unstable relationships. Jung's path is not one of suppression, but confrontation. To recognize anger, envy, fear, insecurity, or the desire for control is not weakness. It is psychological maturity. In facing the shadow, we begin to understand our deepest reactions, contradictions, and wounds. And as these parts are integrated, the psyche becomes more complete, more grounded, more real. Peace rooted in integration is different from artificial calm. It does not depend on perfect circumstances. It is grounded in the acceptance of complexity. The soul does not seek perfection, it seeks wholeness. Authentic serenity emerges when you stop fighting yourself and begin dialoguing with all parts of your being, light and shadow, strength and fragility. In that silent reconciliation, freedom begins. Another essential movement in reclaiming psychological autonomy is the conscious direction of attention. In Jung's view, attention is not merely a cognitive function, it is a transformative force. What you consistently attend to shapes your inner architecture. Every image, word, relationship, environment, and idea you consume becomes part of your psychic landscape. If you do not consciously choose what to focus on, the collective unconscious chooses for you. To leave your mind at the mercy of endless stimuli is to surrender autonomy. The modern world floods consciousness with noise, news cycles, social media, digital comparison, artificial urgency. When attention becomes fragmented, so does the psyche. Without deliberate focus, your inner world is shaped by trends, fears, and narratives that may not align with your authentic path. Taking control of attention is reclaiming psychic sovereignty. It is deciding what deserves entry into your inner space. It is understanding that repeated exposure becomes internalized belief. What you dwell on grows. What you feed strengthens. If you immerse yourself in chaos, outrage, comparison, and distraction, those elements begin to define your internal atmosphere. But when you intentionally direct attention toward growth, reflection, meaningful dialogue, and silence, you restructure your inner environment. Attention is like sunlight. It nourishes whatever it touches. Jung understood that consciousness evolves when attention becomes disciplined. This is not rigidity, it is clarity. It is choosing depth over dispersion. Autonomy begins when you recognize that not every stimulus deserves your focus. Not every voice merits your emotional investment. Not every invitation requires your presence. Attention is finite. To guard it is to guard your psychic integrity. When serenity affirms your worth, when shadow integration grounds your peace, and when disciplined attention restores autonomy, life reorganizes itself naturally. You are no longer driven by unconscious repetition. You are not reacting impulsively to collective pressures. You are responding from a centered place. Wholeness does not eliminate conflict, it harmonizes it. Strength does not silence vulnerability, it integrates it. Peace does not deny darkness, it includes it. And autonomy does not isolate you from the world, it allows you to engage it without losing yourself. In that alignment, serenity ceases to be an abstract ideal. It becomes a lived reality, quiet, steady, deeply rooted. Not because life has become simpler, but because you have become integrated. To surrender your attention to the chaotic flow of external stimuli is like handing over the steering wheel of your life to impersonal, automated, unconscious forces. A distracted mind is not simply busy, it is fragmented. With every impulsive click, every notification that fractures your focus, every piece of content absorbed without discernment, you drift a little farther from the axis of your own consciousness. Individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires discipline. It requires presence. And presence begins with attention. Not shallow attention, not scattered awareness, but a deep state of listening, observing, and consciously choosing. A mind that does not filter what it absorbs becomes easily colonized by ready-made ideas, collective narratives, distorted archetypes that do not reflect its most intimate truth. To reclaim your attention is to reclaim psychic autonomy. It is to say no to the noise that weakens your connection to the self and yes to symbols, experiences, and environments that strengthen your inner journey. It means creating deliberate pauses throughout your day, resisting the excess of information that merely fills but does not nourish. Silence in this sense is not emptiness, it is fertile ground where the soul can speak. When you train your attention, you strengthen the ego in its highest function, mediator between conscious and unconscious, between the outer world and the depths within. An awakened attention can identify repetitive patterns, recognize projections, hold emotional complexity without collapsing into it, and sustain decisions with clarity. The one who regains sovereignty over attention regains sovereignty over life. And in Jungian thought, this is the beginning of genuine inner freedom. To live with purpose, then, is not to chase externally manufactured goals or socially imposed ambitions. It is to listen to the voice of the self, the organizing center of the psyche, the totality that seeks conscious realization across a lifetime. The self does not shout, it whispers. Its language is symbolic, intuitive, often revealed through dreams, existential restlessness, sudden, creative impulses that disrupt comfort and predictability. Following it demands courage because it often contradicts the ego's craving for security, recognition, and control. The ego is necessary. It allows navigation in the external world. But when it becomes tyrannical, when it dominates and refuses to listen to the unconscious, you begin living a life that does not belong to you. Decisions are made from fear, comparison, or the hunger for approval. You pursue paths that look impressive but feel empty. Over time, this misalignment manifests as anxiety, chronic dissatisfaction, boredom that no achievement can cure, a quiet despair that whispers something is missing. Jung described this as a loss of meaning, a separation from the self. Living with purpose is not about following a rigid blueprint. It is about maintaining an ongoing dialogue with your inner world. It is paying attention to recurring dreams, emotional triggers that demand understanding, patterns that repeat until they are integrated. It is choosing according to internal resonance rather than automatic reaction. The aim of life is not success. It is realization of the self, And this realization requires authenticity, courage, and the willingness to relinquish masks. When your life aligns with this deeper calling, your actions cease to be merely functional. They become expressions of your unique transformation. Existence shifts from survival to journey. And this is not about appearing extraordinary. It is about becoming whole. Real transformation, however, is not dramatic spectacle. It is alchemy performed quietly in the fabric of everyday life. The transmutation Jung described does not occur through grand gestures or sudden revelations alone. It is forged in daily discipline, in subtle acts of awareness repeated with intention, a few minutes of reflection, honest journaling, observing your reactions without immediate justification, pausing before responding, breathing consciously. These seemingly simple practices are the slow fire that transforms psychic lead into inner gold. Alchemy, in Jung's interpretation, was never about turning metal into treasure. It was a metaphor for psychological transformation. The raw material is your confusion, your contradictions, your unprocessed emotions. The fire is awareness, the vessel is your daily life, and the gold is integration. Each time you choose reflection over impulse, you participate in this alchemy. Each time you resist projecting your shadow onto others and instead examine your own reaction, you refine the substance of your character. Each time you endure discomfort rather than escape it through distraction, you deepen your inner structure. Transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more fully yourself. The modern world idolizes sudden change, dramatic reinvention, overnight breakthroughs. But the psyche evolves organically. It requires repetition, patience, and humility. There will be days when progress feels invisible, days when old patterns resurface, but every conscious interruption of an unconscious cycle is significant. Every moment of awareness shifts the internal architecture slightly toward coherence. True change does not shout. It stabilizes. It shows up in how you respond under pressure, in how you manage disappointment, in how you treat yourself when you fail, in the way your boundaries become clearer, your speech more deliberate, your choices less reactive. It becomes evident in the absence of chaos where chaos once ruled. The alchemy of the soul is not glamorous. It is disciplined. It is consistent. It is often invisible to others, but over time it restructures your entire existence. The fragmented parts begin to converse. The shadow integrates. The ego strengthens without becoming rigid. The self emerges not as a distant ideal, but as a lived reality. And then something subtle yet profound occurs. Life feels aligned, not because suffering has vanished, not because conflict no longer exists, but because you are no longer divided against yourself. Your inner world becomes ordered not by force, but by integration. Attention becomes intentional, purpose becomes authentic, boundaries become natural, peace becomes rooted. This is the quiet revolution Jung pointed toward. Not escape from the world, but conscious participation in it. Not suppression of darkness, but illumination of it. Not perfection, but wholeness. Transformation is not a single event. It is a daily act of courage. A steady return to center, a refusal to abandon yourself, and when practiced consistently, this ordinary discipline becomes extraordinary power, the power of a psyche that has reclaimed its direction, its coherence, and its truth. This is powerful because it reminds us that much of what limits or confuses us is buried in the depths of our own psyche. When we allow those shadows to be brought into the light, when we begin to look inward with courage and honesty, we initiate a fundamental movement, making the unconscious conscious. That is the true key to real change. As long as we remain trapped in unconscious patterns, repeating the same automatic reactions and living under the rule of a reactive ego, Our outer life will continue to mirror that inner confusion. Crises, conflicts, frustrations, they are not random punishments. They are manifestations of what has not yet been integrated within us. This is why the daily work, even when it feels small and repetitive, is essential. It is in the steady construction of an inner space of awareness that the self finds fertile ground to grow. Transformation happens in the quiet space between one habit and the next, in the patience of allowing yourself to feel fully, in the persistence of choosing to act with intention rather than impulse. It is a process that demands discipline, but also compassion. The soul does not change through force. It changes through attraction to what is true and authentic. Every step forward, no matter how small it may seem, is a victory over internal chaos and a movement toward wholeness. When you commit to conscious practices, reflection, honest self-examination, emotional responsibility, you are cultivating the deepest revolution possible, the revolution of the soul. And as in any alchemical process, the raw material must be worked with time, respect, and care. There is no rushing genuine integration. Real transformation does not depend on external events. It depends on the courage to look within, to embrace your shadows rather than deny them, and to allow the light of awareness to reshape them. When that shift begins internally, the outer world inevitably changes. Not because circumstances magically rearrange themselves, but because you stop reacting to chaos and begin responding from an inner order that is being built stone by stone, habit by habit, day by day. The true journey of transformation is not outward. It is a deep voyage to the center of your being. Jung showed us that by bringing what was hidden into consciousness, we gain autonomy over our lives. We move from repetition to choice, from fragmentation to integration. Each conscious decision to abandon an old destructive pattern and embody a more authentic response is a silent triumph. It is the quiet declaration that you are no longer willing to live unconsciously. And so the question remains, are you willing to turn inward? Are you willing to confront your shadow without denial, without self-hatred, and allow the alchemy of the soul to unfold in your own life? Real change begins the moment you accept responsibility for your inner growth. It begins when you choose habits that reflect your commitment to awareness, clarity, and truth. Not grand gestures, not dramatic reinventions, but small, deliberate acts of alignment repeated consistently. If you are ready to take that step, ask yourself, what small conscious habit can you begin today? Maybe it is 5 minutes of silence each morning. Maybe it is journaling honestly about your emotions. Maybe it is pausing before reacting in anger. Choose one, commit to it. Let it become the first stone in the foundation of a more integrated life. And remember, this is not a solitary path. Growth becomes more powerful when shared. If this message resonates with you, reflect on the commitment you are ready to make and declare it. Share it, anchor it. Because the revolution of the soul begins quietly, but its impact reshapes everything. Let this be the beginning, one day at a time, one habit at a time, one conscious choice at a time.